at this time, the civil rights movement had just broken out. I think it was 57, 58, something like this. And I first started hearing about it as a kid. And my mother loved the NAACP so much she had me join it. Not volunteer to join it. She just signed me up for it. And so as a youth, I was in the NAACP. Now they didn't do anything. I mean, the NAACP, they were really just a businessman's organization, black business organization. That's all they really cared about. And in fact, the guy who was over the one school, high school there, one black high school, he turned out to be a pivotal figure in trying to stop the protest movement when it broke out in 1960. I wasn't a high school student myself, but my cousin was. He was there, and he and some others on their own decided that they would have a protest in Chattanooga. So they marched from the high school, which was right on the outskirts of the downtown area, and they marched to and through the downtown area, and they went into various department stores and demanded that they be served. Of course, the whites weren't going to serve them. It was legally at the time of racial segregation, so they felt like they weren't going to serve with people. So the people just sat down. Students just came in there and sat down, right? And then the cops came. A fight broke out. First of all, the white racist kids and Klansmen and whoever came and tried to spit on people and hit people on the head and all this kind of stuff. So this particular instance, there was no preacher or something or other telling them not to fight back, and so they jumped up and started fighting these racists back, and they drove them out of there. When they ran them out of the department store, I think it was a Cress's department store. As they ran them out of that department store, then the police came and they started to arrest them, harass them and arrest them. And myself and young kids like myself, and also people in the community started to march from the center of the black community, which was also downtown, and started to march in large numbers, in fact, to come into the downtown area to protect the students. And we were hit with high pressure water hoses, which was years before what happened in Birmingham, which got tremendous attention. But this was years before that. It hit us with high pressure water hoses. They let loose police dogs on us, all kinds of stuff to stop us from getting to the center of the city. And so this thing was a battle royale, you might say, and it turned out to be a citywide protest. It was heavy. It had nothing like that had happened there before, and that was the event that I point to, which really radicalized me. I'd never seen black people stand up and do anything to fight back against racism. You know what I'm saying? And my family was just, a typical family. We weren't producing radicals or anything, so we didn't think we were. And my mother didn't want me to go down there, but hey, I'm just going. I'm a kid. What do you think? All this excitement going on, I'm not going to be down there. So a bunch of us just pushed our way all the way through from the black community down to downtown to try to get to the downtown area. And so we ran into this wall of police, there's police and police dogs and water hoses and then what have you. And this went on for days. I mean, this kind of stuff. Because the students that were arrested were quickly replaced by others, and this kept on going for quite a time. And the mayor and the other white racist officials didn't quite know what to do about it, and so they wound up making some kind of concessions. And when they made the concessions, you could eat downtown there, and and other things, and a lot of the vestiges, the symbols of segregation were destroyed, just in that protest. And a number of us, who saw this were radicalized by it. Something that lasted with us for the rest of our lives. I guess at that moment I knew what it is I wanted to do. I wanted to be an activist, and I didn't even know what the word meant at that time, but of course, it just stayed with me that we could fight back, we could win, and we can change the world. I mean, I just started thinking about that feverishly for years and years and years. And then after that was over, I went back to school and so forth because, my parents were not going to let me become a traveling organizer. They were going to, make sure I finished my education and so forth. And so I did, but I continued to try to rally the youth, even in the grade school and the junior schools and all this stuff, try to rally them, and kept that going until I got into high school. But the officials had broken up the protests, and they'd driven people out of the schools, might have driven some people even out of the city. And we weren't able to repeat that, although, other protests took place. There it wasn't the same. Guy got older, and eventually I got, drafted into the military against my will and so forth. I became an anti-war activist. I was against the war early, in very early stages. And again, I was looking at things that were happening. The group that formed in 1960 had gone on to become an anti-war movement, a black anti-war movement, as well as a civil rights organization. And I'm talking about the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And, although I couldn't join it at that time, I was influenced by it to a great degree. It was organizing all over the South. It was changing people's living conditions. It was changing the power structure that was against people, the segregated power structure. And it wasn't just Dr. King. In fact, it was a new movement by 1960. People don't understand that. The Birmingham bus boycott produced Dr. King and the adult leadership and so forth. But by 1960, when the three young brothers went into, I think it was Greensboro, North Carolina, and had their city in there, that sparked a whole new wave of protests, which was led by youth and wasn't under the control of the black pastors and all these other fairly conservative elements. And so, a whole new stage of activism came on the set. And eventually, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee comes along, made of youth, and they're much more militant than these, conservative pastors and so forth. And they call for much more, dynamic kinds of protest movements and stuff. Well, as I said, I couldn't join right then. I was still too young. I was 10 years old when all this stuff happened. And but it made an indelible mark on me. You know what I'm saying? And I started looking into this kind of stuff for years to come. So finally, I wound up going into the service when I turned so-called legal age. Although in my case, I was 17, and they took me into the service. And I knew I was on my way to Vietnam. And when I got into the military, I found elements in there, black youth who were opposed to the war, was influenced. By that time, Black Power was coming on the scene. It was like 1965 when I went to service. And I think Black Power became a national protest movement by then. And there again, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was an essential part of the Black Power movement. It was the seedbed of it. And so a lot of young people were influenced by it. And this was a young people's movement. The Black Power movement was, as opposed to, the black pastors and so forth in the early stages. And all of this stuff had a deep and lasting impression on me. And by the time I went into the military, I was totally opposed to the war. And I refused to go to Vietnam, refused to report. And I was arrested and so forth. And they had me on some base in Germany. And this was at a time when they were going to, the draft was so unpopular that they had started what they call a levy. And this levy was, they would take troops from France, Germany, South Korea, and other places where they had, where the troops were, and they would take those troops and send them to Vietnam. And so we started a protest campaign against it while I was there in Germany. And we had people leave and go AWOL or desert the military entirely, and they would go to the, some countries in, I think one of them was Sweden and Denmark, and I can't remember but there were several Scandinavian countries that uh, were a source of protection. People went there and just dropped out of the military completely. And I don't know. I think that when when they found out this was going on, with military intelligence and the police, German police and German intelligence found out that this was going on and I was involved in it, and it wasn't just me. There were others in other cities in Germany and other places where the troops were located. And when they found out about this, I was arrested and taken to a military prison in Mannheim, Germany, which this prison used to be a concentration camp for the Nazis. Actually, is a vicious place, and I was facing some serious charges. They wanted to charge me with treason at first, and of course that's a death penalty charge. You could lose your life like that. And but the anti-war movement in Germany, some contacts I had made during the time I'd been there, rallied around me, and they let people know in other countries, including the United States, let them know I was being held and facing these charges and all this stuff. And I did serve some time in the prison there, waiting for trial. But when I got to the actual trial, it was so much protest, people in the streets and around this prison facility, this infamous prison facility in Mannheim, Germany, um, that they were forced to drop the heaviest charges and to just dismiss me from the service. And they couldn't even give me a dishonorable discharge, which is like a blacklist. They couldn't even give me that. But they pushed me out of the service, said I was too dangerous and I was turning the troops against the higher brass and so forth. And so I was pushed out. Came home, and this when I started working with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and later the Black Panther Party for a brief period when they were allied or in a merger. Some people say it's a merger, some people say it was an alliance, whatever. They were working together, and so in the early stages there, I started to sell the Black Panther newspaper when it came out, and that was not looked upon fondly by the white power structure and the cops and so forth. And I got beat up a lot and take the papers and throw them away and all this kind of stuff. They didn't always get a chance to do it, but sometimes this would happen. And I had to go to Atlanta to get the newspaper and bring it back to Chattanooga. And and this kind of harassment continued on. But then that was in '67, and then by '68, the the assassination of Dr. King took place. There were rebellions all over the country, and even in the state of Tennessee, there were so-called riots, as they call them, as if it was a criminal act, But these rebellions took place, and one of the places it took place in was Chattanooga, and Memphis, and all the major cities. And after the rebellion took place, the attorney general and some of the other cops and other officials and cops as well had started some kind of what they call treasonous board. Supposedly they were going to find that, and they did make a finding that the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and the at that time it was the Black Panther Party they didn't have any chapters in Tennessee or the South at that time, but it was known that they were working together. That in point of fact, the leadership of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was drafted by the leadership of the Black Panther Party to help them build their movement. And so they found that this was treason. These were communist agitators and so forth and so on. And so they set up these black power grand juries, they call them, and they to investigate the organizers and activists in those movements and in others as well. And so I was eventually put to position. Well, one of my friends had been a so-called leader of this faction that at the time of Dr. King's murder had protested the and become a leader in the campaign against what the cops and the racists were doing. And he was assassinated. He was shot and killed by the police. And that was I was my cue to get out of Dodge and and avoid what was the repression that was coming. 68 and 69 were the years recognized as the repression of the black struggle and of the anti-war movement and the New Left, as it was called back in those days. And so I left first and just went to Atlanta and was living in Atlanta. And then I come to find out later that, in point of fact, the FBI was looking for me on some kind of warrant, unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. And so I tried to go underground, but it really wasn't an underground, especially for black people. It wasn't really an underground. And so I knew I had to get out of the country. And so I hijacked a plane to Cuba.